Okay, and I'm now showing my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen. I've removed all the names, but here are examples of the points that you submitted that you wanted to gain from this session. So looking at tools, stakeholder management, see what tools are used again. So tools modeling has been mentioned here. Learn new techniques, understand process improvement model, and again, look what tools are used, okay? So if that's the fundamental areas that you are looking for, then I can show you John's presentation, but we can go through that then, because I think based on the work that I've done, hopefully I can answer those points anyway. So let me stop sharing my screen. Okay, I think we have more people who are looking to attend, perhaps. There's some stuff in the chat. And I've got a message from John saying that he can't get onto the link. So Dev, if I could ask you, please, as I get started, if you could just work with John to get him on. So I've sent the link. I'm not sure why it's not working for him. And I see he's said he's got some technical issues. So, okay, so yeah, we'll try and get him on, but, you know, I've already said my apologies. We do have this session taking place tomorrow and Thursday as well. So, you know, by all means, feel free to join then, but I feel I could cover what I need to cover anyway. And just on note, John is just about to join the room, so perfect timing. So he will save the day. Otherwise, you're going to hear me speaking for the next 45 minutes or so. John, thanks for joining. I just threatened everyone on the call to cover your presentation, so you've saved the day by joining. So I've already done an introduction, and so has Dev as mentors, and I've explained what we were looking for as outcomes from this session. Would you like to now take over, John, share your screen? I'm already recording. Introduce yourself and to go through your slides, please.
I will, Alim. Sorry, everybody. Let me just get sorted. I had some technical issues then, so. Can you hear, Alim?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, right,
so, yeah,
okay.
If you'd like to, as I said, introduce yourself, share your screen, and take it away. And timing is perfect, by the way, John, in that, we allowed for up to 10 minutes for people joining in and introductions. And then, as I told the audience earlier, about 15 minutes for your presentation, followed by approximately 30 minutes for the Q&A. And it's up to you, John, whether you'd like to stop at the end of each slide and take questions then, or leave them all to then. I'll leave that for you to decide. Okay,
no worries at all. So let me just get the technical bits up. Can everybody see that? Oh, Alim, I'll just speak with you at the first. Can you see my screen at the minute?
I was just on mute. I just needed to unmute myself. Yes, I can see your screen, and I think everyone else can. So yes, carry on.
Fantastic. Okay, so hi everybody. Sorry about the lateness. My name's John Mills. Tonight for me, sorry, because I'm in Australia. We are going to be talking very briefly. There's a 15-minute overview of an operating model process improvement. I'm sure Alim's gone through this before. So there's a 15-minute presentation, and then we are basically going to open it up to mentors and leads at the end of that presentation, just to take questions and then just discuss it in further detail. Obviously, this is a really big topic, or can be a really big topic. So I've concentrated on the first bit, being the as-is. I'm on quite a personal mission to push some of my subject matter out into the IT industry. So I will concentrate a little bit on the as-is, and then hopefully what we get from a Q&A perspective, we'll be able to look at running a second session, or be able to have a further detailed one-on-one session with all the mentors. So what's in it from your perspective? Well, having a look at this presentation, I kind of got the feeling that no matter what level you are, what level of expertise or experience or whatever your role is, that you'll be able to take something out of here and look at it and say, look, I can do that within my own business now. Whether you are, you know, a general manager looking at doing the complete process improvement, or you are a technical someone from a technical background and want to just do something within your own environment to say, hey, how can I be better or how can I contribute? What I'll do right at the end is I will leave some resources and links for everybody, and then we'll take Q&A after that. So what I shall do, just so hopefully now this will... So the three things that I'm going to be looking at are gathering the current state, or the as-is, then the planning a future state, or ToBe, and then we're going to leave it with a summary and a few takeaways. So gathering your current state. So as you can see on the screen at the minute, I've put something there about, and I'm sure everybody has heard this saying or phrase before about this, you can't improve if you can't measure. That is absolutely vital in everything that we do, right? So if we don't know where we are coming from, then how do we know that no matter what we do to improve, how do we know that we've met it, and how do we know where we've come from and where we're going to? So what I'd like to start on is these three areas here, is about understanding your current operational state. So the ways that you can do this, and I'm really going to cover this quite briefly, given that we've only got 15 minutes. So the way you can do this, you may know this information already, but if you don't, there's a couple of ways that you can do this, right? You can go, most of this information is within your company. They do things called balance scorecards. You can have a look at historical balance scorecards, and that gives you kind of an idea of where you are at, where you are currently at. Also, you can look at historical service level reporting. On there, it shows you whether, you know, you are meeting SLAs or you're killing SLAs, or, you know, they are, there is some room for improvement there. It's a good idea to go pick up this stuff and have a look. A little bit higher level is looking at resource and pricing models. This is more from a perspective of, have you got the right resources, or are you currently under-resourced, over-resourced? Is your pricing model? Like I said, that's a little bit higher level, but it's still some really good information to get hold of. I've put this in there because I think this is really, really important, and often the people do get forgotten about once we go down this path. A current as-is state. And employee engagement is really, really important in this. If you haven't got an engaged workforce, then getting to a future state is going to be a lot harder, and vice versa. If you've got a really engaged workforce, then getting to a future state is a lot easier. And then I've put in the last one, and this is going to go into the next one too, is a customer satisfaction. And this is just briefly to understand how your customers are perceiving you, right? So if your customers are telling you that, you know, you're rubbish and you get a lot of feedback, and your net promoter scores are really low, then there is obviously a massive room for improvement. If they're telling you, you know, oh, this is exemplary, this is great, you know that you're in the right level, and that gives you some confidence that you're doing the right things, and that will lead on to helping you in the future state. So that's like just gathering, just some quick wins about gathering your current operational state. I've put the customer in because obviously they are very important, and when I say gathering your as-is, you've got to know what you are doing and what your business does. And this is obviously, the customers are a large part of that. CSAT, VOC, and NPS. So CSAT is customer satisfaction. We've just talked about that, and that was from an internal external way. This is an external internal. VOC is voice of the customer. A lot of times people put a lot of these out, companies put a lot of these out to understand where their customer needs are. And then Net Promoter Score, I've just spoke about that. The next two I'm going to kind of just put in, it's really interesting to know, and it's really good to know your demography and ethnography when you're figuring out your current stance. And that's just, you know, how people are, what businesses, what groups you are servicing, things like that. And that makes you build a better picture around, like getting some statistics and things around your people, your culture, your customer, your habits, differences and things like that. So that's, first of all, we did the current operational state. Then part B is kind of understanding your customer. And then C, right at the end, is then understanding your business. And the reason why I've put this in is because this is like, and I don't want to use these really horrible corporate words, but it is kind of a DNA of how you are. So it's really good to know, you know, what your company values are. This is going to play a really, really big part in formalizing a plan to improve your future state. Also, a company mission statement. This is a really good thing to seek out because it's normally got a future state in mind, and your future state, so from an operating model perspective, has to obviously align with that. So it's always good practice or a great practice to go and find out what this is if you don't know that already. This is more from a why perspective. So why do you exist in the first place? You know, do you sell mortgages? Do you do products? Do you do services, things? So why does the company exist, and why does the business exist? There's no point changing an operational model to something that doesn't align with why you exist. And then last but not least, the strategic plan. So there are millions of great ideas, but if they don't fit with where the company or the business wants to go, then there's no point in doing it, whether they're good or not. You know, they have to align to some of these things. Alim, I'm just going to stop for a second there just to say, am I going fast enough? Or?
So I think it's very good, but I need to mention that I have muted everyone. So if you have a question, please unmute yourself. And I actually think that's a good point to pause anyway, just to see if this aligns with what people were looking for from this session. And maybe before you joined, John, you know, some people I think had asked, what do we mean by an operating model? You know, what's the purpose of it, etc. So even some fundamental questions. So let's see if you've already answered them in the presentation that you've done from now. And if there are questions that people would like to ask before you move on. As I said, if you do have a question, can you please unmute yourself? Actually, I'll make it easy. I'll unmute everyone and then to see if there's any questions. So you're all unmuted. Please ask if you have one, and I can mute everyone and John can continue. So any questions for John as things stand, or from what you've seen, or any direction you want to give in terms of what you'd like to see as an outcome from this session?
So one point I did miss out on, Alim, that I would like to just say now is, so you mentioned it before about what an operating model is, right? So there are several different departments within a business. Finance obviously has an operating model. So operating models are basically just how that department is set up from a technical perspective, from a process perspective, and from a people perspective to basically fulfill that function for the business. So IT has got an operating model, finance has an operating model, and this one we're going to be concentrating a bit more on the technical side, but in any improvement whatsoever, and in any operating model process improvement, we have to understand the current state. So that's that as is, and that as is the foundation that you need to gather before you move on to, you know, doing what we're going to talk about next as far as gap analysis and things like that.
Okay, yeah, great. So any other questions for John before he moves on? I appreciate for some group meetings like this, you know, you may have a question and you're thinking, do I ask or don't I ask? Some people, you know, you may not be the kind of person that wants to ask openly. If that's the case, that you do have a question, but you don't necessarily want to raise it here on, you know, verbally, can you please message me? Either the email that I've sent to all of you, or just message me in chat and I'll ask on your behalf. But otherwise, John, yeah, if you can continue, please.
No problems. So the future state planning, right? So that was very, very brief on some really key areas about getting the current state. So this, again, now is just some really brief tips about how we get to a future state planning, or to that to be. The first thing that I've put in here is this: start with a why, right? So this is, why are you doing the process improvement? Why are you improving the operating model? It's really, really important that you have that. It's something that bonds a team together. It's something that gives a goal for everybody that's involved. SMART goals. I'm not sure how many people know about SMART goals. I think I have put a little thing in there. It's just a way of breaking down a goal and making it, as it says there, specific. So, you know, it's clear for everybody. It's measurable, so you know what success looks like when you're finished. It's attainable, so, you know, it's not something like, I want to run 100 meters in 2 seconds. That's just not attainable. Relevant is, again, it's in with everything that you discussed in the as-is state. So it aligns with your company values, it aligns with your strategic plan. So it's relevant. And then the last one at the end is that time bound. So if you can't say on a goal, by March we will do this, or by a date on there, then it's not a SMART goal. I will be able to give this out as well, so you'll be able to come back and have a look at things like this. As I've said, this is a huge topic, and it can be done, and I've done it from a very high level perspective. Being a really huge topic, the best way, it can get a little bit overwhelming, dependent upon your role in this. And a really good way of doing this is to break it down into these 3 areas. That's people, process, and technology. A lot of companies use these 3 subjects because it pretty much covers everything. And from your perspective, you can either say, okay, so my expertise is in the process side of things, so I can look at goals within a process perspective. You might be in the people side of things, or you could be in the technology, or you could be in all 3. The idea around that is, it is a huge subject, and the trick about doing that is having smaller goals, so breaking that really big goal down into smaller goals, and then obviously doing those smaller goals like a project and program management perspective. You know, several small projects make up a program of work, which then you get to execute on a big goal. Same as this. Whether you're in one of those areas on your own, in a technology perspective, and you want to break that down into smaller goals, it's a really good way of getting to a larger goal and executing on that. The second stage that I like to say on this, and a really good tip of this, is whenever you do anything to do with like you have a meeting, whenever you have any gathering or any documentation, it's a really, really good idea to constantly reiterate that goal. It's to constantly say, this is what we are hoping to achieve. It keeps meetings aligned. It keeps people from scope creep. It stops scope creep. I do things like when I go into a meeting, I'll write on the whiteboard like I've put on there, I'll write down what the goal is. So everybody tends to get that. It gives you a really good avenue as well to just say, we can park that. It's a great idea. We can park that, but we're here for this. And it keeps you on track. So constantly reminding you of that. And the more you remind people of it, it gets to be daily conversation so people understand where they're at. And again, what I mentioned before, use things like a gap analysis to find out, where your current state is and where you want to go. And this gap analysis is obviously the bit in between. And we can go into further detail about a gap analysis in the question time at the end. The one thing I wanted to put in here to try and bring this to a head is this. They are big goals, right? And sometimes it is overwhelming to look at these process improvement initiatives. What I've found in my experience is that there's 1,000 millions of great ideas out there, right? And a lot of people don't start them because they kind of go, oh, really, me? Do I need to be doing this? Or am I able to do this? It's a scientific fact that the difference between success and failure is the ability to execute. So the people that actually pick something up and actually do it. Agile goes that way. You make mistakes until you get the right outcome at the end. When you fully understand your own business and you have a clear and attainable goal, then you do like a gap analysis, like I talked about before, or there's another thing called an ABCD planning. So you find out where you are at now. You then say, where do we want to be? And this seems all logical thinking, but once it goes into a plan, it becomes really clear that about what the actions need to happen. And then how do we get there? So where are we at? Where do we want to be? And how do we get there? And then the final one there is about tracking progress to figure out how you keep going and how you are staying on track to meet that goal. Again, thinking smart about that stuff. So 15 minutes, that's very, very, very brief. Gathering your current state, planning a future state, and then just from a summary perspective, I'll leave you all to read that. I'm not going to read that verbatim. What I wanted to bring out in this is what I said at the start. It doesn't matter what role you are. It doesn't matter whether you're the lead program manager or you're a tech guy, doing the technical side of implementing this process improvement. Knowing that information in an as-is state will help you in your own business and with all the things that you're going to do, even outside of process improvement. And you can pick one of those things that are even in your own sphere, and you can say, okay, so how does this information help me do my current role? Okay. Just some great reads for you at the end, and then some great research topics. Gap pest analysis is again, it's a little bit higher than a gap analysis. Talks about like political side of things, or I think they've even expanded that to be pestle, yes, or something now, I think.
Yeah, that's right. I've come across that, yeah.
Which have added like the environment and law into it as well now, I think. Mm-hmm. And then other things to just really interesting to understand is the employee engagement and the NPS and voice of customer. The way the businesses are going now, we've seen it with Uber, we've seen it with Airbnb and the likes. It is instant feedback, and if you don't produce what they want right now and pivot and be able to pivot, then you lose their attention. So these things now are really, really good to understand about your customer. It's absolutely imperative. If we don't get in line with the customer, then we're going to start losing, business, and they're just going to go elsewhere in this commodity-driven world. I think that was it. I think I went over 15 minutes, Alim, sorry.
No, it's okay. That's perfect. And we did stop anyway for some Q&A, didn't we? And we did some housekeeping stuff. So great, thank you. We do have approximately 25 minutes left of this session to have a Q&A. So who would like to ask a question? Like I said, you can either do it verbally now, I'll unmute everyone, or you can ask in the chat window and I'll read it out. So whatever you wish. Does anyone have a question?
Alim, you did send me earlier some of the things, expected outcomes that anyone who came on tonight were looking for. So if we don't get any questions and things, I can go through some of these that I think I didn't touch on.
Yeah, and we also highlighted them here actually, John, before you joined, I believe, in terms of, most of them were around the kind of tools you can use for AsIs and ToBe analysis. I think people
cool.
and you've touched them anyway here, like the pest analysis as an example. Let me make a couple of points from some aspects that I use in doing an operating model and AsIs ToBe to see if it adds anything, and then I'll just try and prompt a couple of questions as well, if I may.
Yeah.
Okay, so the comment I'll make is that where I've done operating model AsIs and ToBe, I've used two additional aspects which you've touched on anyway, John, but I'll just highlight. One is the AsIs and the ToBe of the organizational design. So I'll look at the organization in terms of the people, the roles, and let's just assume for now that it's maybe an ITIL type department, an ITIL organization, whatever it might be. I'll look at the roles that organization has, and I'll see where there are some gaps in the organization. So for example, maybe they don't have availability management covered, or they don't have continuity management covered. And that would then go part of my ToBe proposal. Or even if they have all of the roles covered, if I'm going in a bit more detail, I'll look at the roles, the job descriptions that people have, their roles and responsibilities, and I'll look at if there are any aspects of their role that isn't addressed in their organization, especially where maybe they're suffering from issues, right? So if I've gone in, it's normally because I'm there to troubleshoot something, and it's not quite working how it's meant to work, and so I'd look at the organization. So anyway, I've probably labeled on that a bit too much. The one other area that I often focus on is a model which many of you may have heard. It's the CMMI level 1 to 5 maturity model, where I'll look at, again, let me use ITIL as an example, but it could be project management, it could be others. I'll look at a process. The process may be the change management process or problem management process, and I'll assess it against a level of 1 to 5 using the best practice framework. And I'll identify through my assessment using Visio, Word, PowerPoint. These are some of the tools I'd use, where they have gaps, what they're doing, and therefore what the good practice steps are that they're perhaps missing, which would go as part of my ToBe model. Okay, so just two other aspects. And as I said, the kind of tools I would use are just Microsoft Office type tools. I'll see someone's posted in chat, so let me just have a look at that.
Alim, while you're doing that, can I add a couple of things from my perspective?
Okay.
So just giving you a couple of real world examples of how I've undertaken business process improvement. It is all about working with the organization and with the business who understands how they're meant to operate, understanding what they currently do, and that's an important element of it, which is you starting off just saying, ignoring what you should be doing, what is it that you currently do, and typically done this through workshops, working with the business subject matter experts, getting them in a room, asking them questions about what their processes are, breaking those processes down into categories and sections. And then one of the best examples is just giving them post-it notes and saying, right, tell us what your first step is, and mapping that process on the wall. You work that way. You can see, you can tweak things as they go along. That someone will say, that's not quite how we do it. So you'll understand organizational differences, because there might be one section that does something slightly differently. You need to capture all of these. I would then typically take those elements, once it's all been agreed with the people in the room, convert them into a visual a diagram that actually maps everything out. And then we look at the measurement side of things. Well, if this is the process you do, how long does it take you to undertake this process? What are the steps in between, and how long do each of those processes take? That way you can identify areas of waste, areas where there is unnecessary waiting, areas of redundancy, and then based on that, you then create a ToBe model to say, right, if we now put all of these improvements in, what would the new process look like? Alternatively, it could be of, here is a manual process and we now want to automate it, but perhaps you can't automate the whole process. So you'll identify the elements that you can automate and then put in those new processes in there. And it's an iterative process is what I found, that when you are talking to the business and trying to get them to understand what they want to do, they'll start off wanting one thing, but as they start understanding their own processes, because a lot of people don't really understand their overarching process and everything that's involved, they'll only understand their small bit. But once they start seeing the bigger picture, what they start understanding is, well, why are we doing it this way? Can we do things in a different way? Can we make things better? And so it allows you an opportunity to also role play effectively. Well, if we took this step out, what are the implications? How can things improve? What are we having too many people involved in those steps? Can one person do what two people are currently doing? Not necessarily from a perspective of reducing staff, but more from a perspective of making the whole thing more efficient.
Yeah.
And as you then deliver and demonstrate and show these processes can improve, you then have to implement those. And that's where the big elements of change and transformation come into it, where how are you going to implement it? Are you communicating the right messages, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just something that I've from my experience, how I've delivered business process improvement.
Thank you, Dan. And I think we may have answered this question anyway, but I'll ask it. It's in the chat. You can all see it. But essentially, Robert mentioned, you'll see here, since we were speaking of changes and changes might need backup plans, how would you handle changes to organizational structure? And I mentioned this briefly, but I'll give John you a chance to obviously answer it. But before I do, I'll just touch on one thing that Dev mentioned around role play. So something that I have used before, maybe this is what Dev was alluding to, is actually getting people to visualize the journey that they're going through from the the operating model perspective, the AsIs, as has been discussed, and ToBe. And actually, for this one particular scenario, we put a play together, a script. It was using the Apollo 13, space theme, and it was using the various different processes to show where it was at when something goes wrong. What would we be done, and how it will be done differently. So, in terms of how you show the AsIs to ToBe model, you can be very creative, right? So you can either use Microsoft Office type documents, as we've mentioned, or it could be the other extreme where you actually put on a play. It takes effort, people go into costumes, etc., but there's just one extreme of how you would demonstrate. But anyway, so yeah, John, do you want to pick up on this organizational structure, organizational changes question that was asked?
Yeah, sure. So from my perspective, the handling changes, right, is the key area for this. Is you have to put yourself in each of the affected people or departments' shoes. Okay, so there's a lot of decisions that are made when we are talking about changes, especially to operating plans, that get made at a level that just is so far away from the actual rubber hitting the road. So we create it and we say that it's going to make these changes or create this cost saving, or like Dev mentioned, the automation side of things is going to give us efficiencies, but we never kind of take into consideration the end user, the person like that's actually at the coalface. So for me, especially changes to organizational structure, you have to understand that element first and then work backwards from there, because that tends to have the biggest impact then. If you have people that are not engaged at the end of that process, and ones that do not understand why you've done what you've done, then it's not going to be successful. It's going to be successful on paper in a boardroom or in a GM meeting, but it's not going to be successful in reality. So for me, it's about engaging things like organizational change, to do that kind of ADCAR model type scenario where you really figure out what you are doing and what that impact is on the actual end user.
Thanks, John. So, Robert, I hope that answers your question. I know you mentioned that you've got a microphone issue. I think you had said that. So if you have a follow-up question, please ask in chat. Any other questions from anyone? Any points that you would like to ask around in terms of what's been covered so far? Okay, so look, it seems like there may not be any, but again, I'll try unmuting everyone. Robert said he's happy with the answer we provided in the earlier answer. So let me just see if I can prompt any more dialogue from anyone. Otherwise, if we're finished, then we're finished, we can wrap up. But can I ask those of you who are on the call who haven't spoken yet, have any of you been involved in an AsIs to ToBe operating model work? So either where you are doing it or where it's being done to you. Would you like to give an example of how that impacted you or how you undertook the work you were doing? Anyone? Okay. Okay, so look, if there are no examples to share and if there are no additional questions, let me just take the opportunity now then to thank John. So thank you. And I hope you benefited from it. And we will see you on the following, on the next sessions, either today, tomorrow, or Thursday. So wishing you all well. Thank you, everyone.